My name is Patsy Hicks, and I'm Director of Education at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. And on behalf of the museum, I want to welcome you, thank you for coming, and also ask you to please turn off your cell phones if you haven't already done that. It's remarkable how many times we get reminded that, and yet I always forget. So, this evening, genre-defying, unconventional, acclaimed author Jonathan Lethem, a former winner of a MacArthur Genius Award and hot off being named a Guggenheim Fellow, returns to SBMA to read and discuss his latest book of astute, often idiosyncratic responses to works of art, Cellophane Bricks, A Life in Visual Culture. In the book, Jonathan gathers his writings on art, many published in catalogs, monographs, or exhibition materials, into a sometimes lyrical, audacious, whimsical, tender, and always surprising volume. Above all, this book is an exuberant love letter to art and artists, especially his father, Richard, who is here with us this evening, who remains, as he describes him, my idol. I learned to think by watching my father paint. And we can see on the stage 3 of his father's paintings done in the last 18 months. More about that. So what do others, besides his son, who clearly idolizes him, say about Richard? Richard Brown Lethem began his studies at the Kansas City Art Institute and earned a BFA and MFA at Columbia University in 1956 and 1975, respectively. He began teaching at Columbia in 1957, and the following year received a Fulbright Fellowship in painting for study in Paris. He has held subsequent teaching positions at Columbia University, University of Kentucky, Kansas City Art Institute, University of New Hampshire, and the University of Southern Maine. Richard Brown Lethem has been living and thinking in paint on canvas since the 1950s. Now in his 90s and still painting, his work is in many public and private collections, and for one night only, we are happy to say, right here in this, pardon the pun, pop-up exhibition. We hope that you'll have a chance to ask questions of both of them after, and to take your time in the lobby. We have a small reception and book signing going on there. We thank Chaucer's for representing these books tonight, and please tell Michael thank you when you go out there and see him at the table. So I am delighted to have this opportunity to ask you to welcome Jonathan Lethem once again, and if we're lucky, perhaps Richard Brown Lethem will join for the Q&A as they turn parallel stories into parallel play. Please join me in giving them a huge round of applause and welcome.
Oh, that was very nice. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So, I am holding a copy of this book, Cellophane Bricks, which was just very nicely introduced, so I don't have to say very much more. It's me writing about art that I made a little bit, art that I looked at, art that I collected sometimes, art I was invited to write about by the artists often. And it turns out the only way I know how to do this is by writing very memoiristic, very much about myself kind of pieces. So it's really, in some ways, the nearest thing I've ever put together to a kind of memoir. But an oblique one, done in these glances at different things, different kinds of objects and images. And it's full of the images themselves, so it's, you know, it's an art book. What I'll do is, while you are gazing at these paintings, which speak eloquently for themselves, so my father doesn't need to necessarily say a word, I'm going to read 3 pieces from the book, the very beginning, actually, and then almost at the very end, and something in the middle. And I'll talk a little bit in between and set up, or, you know, just explain here or there. And then, yeah, I'm going to invite some questions, and maybe we can get him to answer some questions at that point, too, if you want to hear his voice. But let me give this a go. In two cases, these are parts of the book I've never tried reading aloud before, so let's see how it goes. The first thing I'm reading is from the kind of overarching introductory piece, which is called Cellophane Bricks, Fog, and Cinder. I grew up in a house full of paintings and books. I've said that so many times in more elaborate ways, it feels awkward to still be needing to say it. Yet the core mystery still holds, as core mysteries will tend to do. Paintings and books. My father made the paintings and my mother handed me the books and talked about them and read them herself. I began wanting to make the paintings before I can remember. There are photographs of me beside my father in his studio with a brush in my hand, trying to make marks on the same wall I used to hold myself up on 2 feet. I began wanting to make the books, too, soon enough. Unlike with my father's paintings, I lacked direct sensory evidence that the books were forged from individual human effort. I might believe they had dropped from the sky or been harvested from the sea floor. The moment I realized that people made them, I wished to be one of those people. For obvious reasons, I experienced this desire analogously, as if the books were individual artifacts made of stuff, like the paintings. In fact, as with many children, the first books and comic books I manufactured were precisely along these lines. The covers and interiors hand-drawn in letters and lettered in editions always of one. And long after I began writing for publication, but when I still worked on a typewriter, I'd think of my writing as a form of tiny serial sculpture, carving the font impressions through an inky fabric ribbon onto the paper's pulpy body, then plastering over the goofs with white, sticky daubs of paint. The world is divided up into people who remember whiteout and the people who don't remember whiteout. Books are a technology that shaped me while seeming like the city streets walled in with row houses, like the dial telephones with spiral cords, like the black and white televisions with rabbit ear aerials, to be a natural world I took for granted. Books are operable semi-consciously and integrated totally into human society, like robot pets. And as we know about our pets, the creatures we domesticate also reformat us to their own purposes. Language, consciousness, that ethereal stuff that we seek to stabilize into books has always been a ghost in the machine. I'm sure I'm not the first writer to yearn for the seemingly more grounded situation of the painter or sculptor, who dwell in what looks to be an enviable realm of craft, routine, and expertise. For me, these writings about art in this book measure an ache for a return to a creative precondition. After all, I did make paintings and drawings before I quit to write. I even carved marble for a year when I was 17 at the High School of Music and Art. A couple of my unfinished stone heads still rot in my barn. I made hundreds of drawings and collages, many dozens of oil paintings, and heaps of comics before I'd written my first scattered pages of fiction. Then, all of a sudden, I threw this material production over in favor of what has turned out to be a permanent plunge into the etheric realm of language. This is where I've lived. In my brief, failed college career, I still took art classes while writing fiction on the sly. This was force of habit. I knew how to be an art student, and a superficially impressive one. This may have, in fact, been what a psychoanalyst would call an extinction burst, a brief, frantic enactment of a behavior that is about to be abandoned. My college art teachers saw through the bullshit. The paintings had words in them, and they were loaded with hints of characters, concepts, and situations. Overloaded. I was making paintings that wanted to be stories and novels. But I never quit befriending working artists. Their company felt like home to me. I visited their studios, where the conversation helped me think about the formal and conceptual aspirations I harbored for my books. Helped quite a bit more often than did shop talk among writers, which too easily degenerated into gossip and finances. Maybe the artists had the same problem when they talked amongst themselves. Eventually, I was invited to write pieces to go into catalogs of images of work by my artist friends. The situation, that of running my language up against the mystery of the artifacts, kept revealing interesting new problems. Jean-Luc Godard said that every film is a documentary about a certain period of time in the lives of the actors. Equally, each novel is a diary of a sequence of days, and usually years, in the life of the person piling the sentences up. It may not be carving stone, but it has a certain devotional quality. Like all devotion, it makes hours and then your life disappear. As I've gotten older, my writing has gotten more commemorative, or reconstructive, that may be a better word. I'm wishing to suspend the world I've known, to amber it in language. The urge is to be able to stroll around moments and view them from all sides. So these art pieces in this book are inevitably memory pieces as well. I'm unpacking the time that lurks inside these objects. I have no illusion that these writings aren't, in the end, all attempts to squint around the perimeter of my own limits and see myself more clearly. By identifying with visual artists, I'm searching for a lost self. Art's best capacity may be to make the heavy and the light trade places, which is to say, to make the dualities dance in the manner of all life. Heaviness and lightness, the subject of my favorite Italo Calvino essay. And I'll forever be the child sitting watching Fantasia at Radio City Music Hall, amazed that Walt Disney made ponderous elephants who could be blown off to the far horizon by the mildest of breezes. Okay, that's the sort of introduction that sets up or excuses all of these different things I did, which is basically, like I say, I let my art friends show me their work, lead me around in their studios. Then I would let them invite me to write about their work, and I would say, give me one. I don't want pay, I want a drawing, or I want a little painting. And so I ended up with all this artwork, and the pictures in the book are, and I'm inviting you to envy me right now. It's mostly stuff that's in my house, but you'll have to check out the book to take a look at it. So a lot of the writings about people's work is fairly, it's fairly indirect. It's evocative and poetic, and I don't really do art writing. I don't really know how to. Along with saying, give me a drawing instead of money, I would also say, I can't really do this. I'll write you a story instead. Or, they're not exactly stories, but they're kind of literary writing. They're poetical or evocative or narrative fugues. I'm trying to mind meld with the artist by making something in language that resembles their work. So I'm going to give you an example, a deep example of one of those right now. This is a piece I wrote for Nan Golden. It's written in sections, so I'll read you the headings of each section. And this is an example of this book in a vein where it's not so much like a memoir, but more like, I don't know what, prose poems. And this happens to be the title piece of the whole book. It's one of the last pieces I wrote for the book, and it's called Cellophane Bricks, which incidentally, the phrase came from something that my partner Anna was murmuring in her sleep, and I heard this phrase. And I don't know that it was really cellophane bricks, but it sounded to me like that. And I said, what? And she said, I don't know. And I said, you said cellophane bricks. So this is called Cellophane Bricks, a fugue for Memory Lost, for Nan Golden. And then here's the first section heading, When We Are All Beautiful. That time in life when we go to the mirror to discover who we might be. Will the desires that flicker within us flicker back in our direction? When we are all beautiful, we are all beautiful together. The eyes of others form another mirror, one utterly shifting and unstable. A house of mirrors, in fact. In the house of mirrors, there are bedrooms. The beds are mirrors, too. In that time when we are all beautiful, the world of glances makes a theater of possibility, a theater where the audience is all on stage. When we are beautiful, we yearn to measure our powers of attraction, but these alter in an instant, depending on how we live in our skins or who is looking. It may feel as if someone is rolling the dice. A state of mutual enchantment is called getting lucky. Allure is that field of distortion in which things become possible. Life arranges itself around this destabilizing waveform, the desires we kindle in others. These act as solvent, allowing us to slide through certain rooms like a hot blade in butter, shortcuts in the construction of fate and identity. When we are all beautiful, we live at the utter mercy of the situation. At the height of our self-discovery, we all discover what it is to both lose and win. To be beautiful is not to be a persistent winner. Our inmost selves are made of shattered mirrors. When we are all beautiful, we are formed in a constellation of glances as much as by any innate self-knowledge. When we are all beautiful, we erect defenses, deflections, partitions. A part remains in hiding. We crouch behind the barrier of our own surfaces. Another section. The title of the section is Self, She Told Me, is a Game. Self, she told me, is a game, a shuck, a con. She moved her cigarette to her mouth and shoved her cuffs up to her shoulders, displaying for me her sleeve tattoos. We're decorated skins, she said. Neurosis, vanity, behavior, that's the decoration. Underneath the decoration, underneath the neon, the glitter, the party dress, nothing. A quotient of eternity, some activated nullity. Nothing that shimmers, nothing that simmers, nothing that leaks out through the eye holes, searching for its equal in others, nothing searching for its mate. We're all just skinfuls of the universal, stuff, the fog of being. Like the planets out there, they're all formed of the same cosmic dust, 90% of which remains empty potentiality, dark matter, negative space, driftwood, tumbleweeds drifting through, ghost towns of ourselves. You don't want to be yourself, she said? Don't sweat it. Being other than we are is effortless, since we're not much of anything to begin with. Getting out of oneself is as easy as falling out of bed. Okay, thank you. We can clap later, but thank you very much. This section is called A Bridge in Time. A human life becomes a bridge in time. Abide long enough, you'll detect the weight of it, the presence of a continent of lost things extending behind you, on a bridge extended in free space. This is what passes for luck around here. Live long enough to bear a past you can't explain. Irrevocable worlds locked in your body, in mute witness. Glance in the side mirrors. You glimpse it. A bridge piled on islands in mist. The bridge might be crumbling behind you, but you sense it there. The fewer companions you feel moving alongside, the more you want to draw a picture of it. Only your companions will ever see the picture. The companions are the bridge. Your body is the vehicle moving across. Okay, I'm going to read just one more of the sections of this piece, although it has a few remaining. And this section is called We Are Never Less Beautiful. We are never less beautiful. Though our beauty stumbles and wearies, we are never less beautiful. Our beauty staggers and falls. It plummets into valleys, into pits of time. Our beauty is scarred. It is pitted and crated like the moon. Time is the demolisher. It scatters our beauty like smoke to the sky, like smoke rising to the moon. Time scatters our beauty like bread on the water, like a message smuggled into a bottle and lost to the waves, lost to the tides that are themselves drawn like a pulse toward the moon. I have 3 questions about the moon, he said to me once as I held him in my arms. 3 questions? About the moon, yes. What are your 3 questions about the moon? What does it want? Where is it going? Does it need our help? Time, the demolisher, yet we are never less beautiful. Find us, see us here, frozen in punctuated equilibria in pictures on a wall. The negative spaces, the chalk outlines, the unmade beds, the peripheral glances in the mirror of your gaze. The wounds we leave in time, the holes we scorch in the film, the record we leave in the sensitive skin of the cellophane. See us here. I had no answers to his questions about the moon, but I never forgot them. Okay. So the last part of the book I'll read before we can just get conversational is almost the very end of the book. And the last 2 things in the book are both directly about my father and his work. So, of course, there are also memoiristic pieces again. This one is about the recent years of, well, it culminates in a description of the most recent years of living with, having his studio right behind my house. I think the piece will explain it pretty well. It's called My Father Has Started a Painting, and it's illustrated with a picture of what, at the time when I wrote this, was one of the most recent paintings. Now these are even fresher. My father has started a painting. This also has section titles, so I have to do this silly thing with my hand to indicate this again. I am trying to enter my father's studio. I hold 4 or 5 memories of my life before Brooklyn, my life in Kansas City, where my parents lived until I was 3. These are memories unreconstructed from photographs. There were very few photographs taken, or from accounts by others. The memory that has seemed certain to be the first, my very first memory, because it is a memory which inhabits a body that is crawling, while the others are those of a toddler up on his feet. This memory involves my mother's arms gently restraining me from behind as I attempt to enter my father's painting studio. We lived on the campus of the Kansas City Art Institute, the college where my father taught, in a large stone building with fossils embedded in some of its walls. Being led to trace the fossils' impressions with my fingertips is another of those earliest memories. The building has since been razed and replaced. In the memory, there are 5 or 6 steps to my father's studio door. It feels attainable. At other times, I will be invited to enter. Photographs show this, a toddler standing propped on the studio's wall with a crayon in hand, scribbling beside the father, painting. But this is a photograph, not a memory. Not now. Now I may not enter. This is not the time. He needs to be alone now to paint. I am a function of my father's studio. In Brooklyn, for 15 years or so, my coming of age partly involved a negotiation of my proximity from the scene of my father's painting. My entry into that space was always charged, not because he required imperial solitude, a requirement in that family, in that house, in that city, in those years that would have been met with an absurd, almost gleeful refusal by the oceans of reality that battered at his studio door. but only because it meant so much for me to enter. In those years, I painted and drew, in his studio beside him and elsewhere. I sat for a portrait 5 or 6 times and sat watching as he painted my mother, my siblings, others. I stood before his canvases and spoke with him about the results. I sat and read while he painted. Once I snuck in and altered, on a canvas not yet dry, a few brushstrokes that bothered me. I sat in a group of artists, including my father, and drew from the nude model they'd hired to pose there. At one point, I carved out a space to insist was my own creation, a tiny occupation within his studio, a shallow wooden box of gravel and soil in which I planted miniature cacti and created bonsai landscapes of stones. Then I went away to college, and then I ran away from college to California. Around that same time, my father's studio moved to a building under the Manhattan Bridge, one that was eventually set on fire by the mafia. A real Brooklyn story. And for the next 15 years, more, I was barely present in his life, or he in mine. My place in his studio was then wholly glossed in memory. I am writing about my father's studio. I began, after that, to journey back home, and the home to which I'd begun to journey back was now in Maine. His studio was a barn. We picked up where we'd left off in my high school years, standing in front of his paintings, discussing their progresses, frustrations, breakthroughs, and the evolution in his method and style. In the early middle of my life and the late middle of his, I began writing about my father's studio. I first did this obliquely, in the manner of a fiction writer, with the predictable, misleading results. After I depicted a man in a studio making a painted film in one of my novels, my father was often asked, "How's your film coming along?" He had, of course, never been making a film. Next, I wrote about it as directly as possible in an essay that began with the phrase, "I learned to think by watching my father paint." I added my voice to 2 or 3 of his exhibition catalogs. I was at his openings again now, frequently, as I had been as a child. Too many openings to remember in Maine, in New Hampshire, in Manhattan. I believe it took my father a year or two not to feel disappointment at my own diversion from the medium of painting to the medium of writing. It took him a while to recognize that my writing was a continuation, not an interruption, to understand it as a part of my life that was enclosed in the influence of his practice, as it so obviously was to me. But that time quickly passed. Our conversation standing in front of his paintings began to include discussions of my own process, my own relation to form, my own aspiration to make things I'd not yet figured out how to make. Some of my most crucial writing depended on answers only he could supply regarding the life we knew in Brooklyn, its earliest undercurrents. I have entered his studio, but he has also entered mine. Okay, and the last section. My father has started a painting. In my father's 88th year of life, his 7th decade of painting, the story took a turn. In the unvaccinated early months of the COVID years, I drove my father and a few of his belongings from Maine to California. His studio life was collected into my care. To be clear, that is to say, it was collected into my garage. It was a fortunate garage, one placed deep back from the street in my vine and vegetable and weed-choked backyard, and already cleared and appointed with clean white walls and bright lights. The garage door more or less permanently open to the micro-seasons of the Inland Empire. He resumed painting there within weeks, if not days. He remains a painter who paints. The dailiness of his practice, habituation, addiction, however one might wish to understand it, is almost unfathomable unless glimpsed up close. Checking the progress in my father's studio was now as easy as falling out of bed, or specifically strolling from the breakfast table into the backyard. I could do it in robe and slippers with my morning coffee. After 48 years apart, my attention and his studio had been restored to a domestic partnership. In deep quarantine mode, I'd also shifted my walking desk from my campus office to the same garage. I'm no runner, neither of sprints nor marathons, but when I'm lucky, I'm a diligent walker. Some mornings I woke earlier than him. I wake early these days, and trudged and moved sentences around out in the garage in the company of his paintings for hours before he'd appear and begin advancing his own causes. Other days, I'd absent-mindedly turn the corner from the house to the garage with my coffee cup balanced on my laptop, thinking I'd be working alone, and find him there, stepping back from a canvas to consider the freshest marks he'd made there. More than a few times, we simply worked together. He was almost always happy to find me already there or see me appear. Once in a while, though, I'd round that corner and understand that he needed the garage to himself. It happened just the other day. I heard him say, "I'm just getting something going here," and I knew the implication. Easily, since it called back to that other studio, into whose precious solitude I'd sometimes intruded. On the 4th floor of the brownstone in Brooklyn, in that impossible family, in that impossible city, in that impossible time. It called back even to my mother's hands, adjusting my crawling body backward on the stair and reaching past me to seal his studio door. Yet the favor of my retreat is nothing now that I can't easily bestow. The weight of longing is gone. This is just part and parcel of living with the old man. Okay, that's when you can clap. Thank you. Thank you. So, can the house lights come up just a tiny bit? I know it'll, yeah, great. I can see who's here. Hi. You were totally like a perfect blank to me. So I will welcome some questions. My dad is in the front. There's a microphone he could grab. There's also a microphone that the question askers can grab. Is someone's coming with it. So I'm stalling just a little bit, but I'm really happy to try to explain more about this book or about anything I just read or I don't know, tell more stories. Yeah, someone over there.
The places that you talked about, Brooklyn, Maine, and Inland Empire, California, could not be more different from each other.
Yeah.
So how did that affect the painting? How did that affect the writing?
Well, so that's an enormous question. And I'm going to repeat it also because you didn't have the mic, so we're going to get everything on the record here, right? That the places are so different to the geography, New York City, Brooklyn, the Inland Empire, Maine. How did it affect the painting and writing? I mean, I could talk for an hour answering that question. My writing is very, very responsive to place. I mean, I've written about Brooklyn obsessively, but not always only when I'm there. Actually, some of those big novels about Brooklyn were written while I was somewhere else and kind of dreaming my way back to Brooklyn. So that's that method that James Joyce called silence, exile, and cunning. You know, you think about Dublin when you're in Paris. And I wrote a lot about Brooklyn while I was living in Maine and at writers' colonies in upstate New York, and then again recently I wrote a whole book about Brooklyn while living in the Inland Empire. So it's not always about where you are when you're working. And I can think about how, I mean, I think I didn't know when I was beginning to write novels how much they were going to be immersed in locality, because I've also written about California very devotedly. I'm doing that now. Again, I'm writing trying to write the great novel of the 57 freeway from through Diamond Bar, and I feel like it's total terra incognita. I don't think anyone's ever written a novel about Diamond Bar before. And my dad's painting is also very responsive to place. I mean, I allude to this in that essay. Our world in Brooklyn was very social. His studio was loaded with colleagues and students and interruptions and kids, and he depicted the neighborhood and our family. He painted a lot from the live model before him. Our neighbors, there were these stacks of drawings of people that I really knew only on the street, and I didn't even know they'd come into the house at some point for him to draw at times. He was really like cataloging human life. And also, they referred to the artist's life. He did a lot of, it's a classical subject in a way, painters and models on the same canvas. He did a lot of that kind of work. In Maine, there was a period when his work, just before coming to California, had gotten extremely gray and austere. It was starting to look kind of scraped and philosophical. The color was disappearing. And it does happen that his Inland Empire period has been an explosion of a new relationship to color. It's really striking how color came roaring back, which I think he would tell you, he might do it if we let him, that the botanical reality of the chaos of all the different kinds of cacti and evergreens and, just all orchids and all the weird, crazy plants on the street, that you could just, he would pick up seed pods and bring home flowers and stuff. So he was responding to that environment. Yeah, I'm rambling, but thanks for that great question. Yeah. Another one, or one for, yeah, here. Yeah.
I'm just curious to know if your father has heard you read, has been present at a lecture like this before.
Well, yeah, he can tell you, but I'll say something while it's on the way to him, that I've never read those exact pieces to anyone before. So, yeah. But he's heard me effuse about his writing a few times. I mean, about his painting, excuse me.
The immensity of the content exchange between Jonathan and myself over the years is a little overwhelming me right now. And there always, even when he was rejecting our life in Brooklyn briefly to go to the West Coast and lead a very different life, there was a tremendous history of interaction between us, which he has described somewhat in brief terms here, that was immensely influencing in many ways my ability to be in the world as an artist and to respond to the life that we had in Brooklyn that was so immensely chaotic at times, political involvement, amazingly emotional depths because of illness and death, early death that was tragic. So I am overwhelmed, but appreciative of being able to have lived this long and to have had all of these opportunities to work together, in a sense, to overlap and to influence each other.
Couple more would be great.
There was one over there, wasn't there?
Yeah. Anybody over here? This gentleman back here. Hey there.
I'd be interested to know what part of your father's painting comes from his, what you call, internal beauty, as opposed to circumspection with regard to confronting different elements of what he found, the environment he found himself in. So, internal beauty being painted on the canvas, if you will, versus, there's all this stuff out here, and his being circumspect about all of that from the outside looking in.
Sounds like a question for him. So the question is sort of, I'm going to simplify it for you because I think it'll help me think about it. When you're painting, how much is from an completely inner world and landscape of whatever feeling or imagistic dreaming, and how much is responsive to your environment? Can you say? Does it change or stay the same?
Over the years, I have become much more mystical in my thinking and in my ability to absorb the silent meditation in my studio when I'm there, either actively painting or just kind of daydreaming about who knows what is going through my mind. And so there is no set answer to that question, I think.
I think that's a good answer to the question. Yeah.
It's a kind of a development of consciousness that is freed up from the daily wear and tear, which goes hopefully into the painting and comes out with surprises and marvelous changes.
Just one way back there. Oh, there's one there too.
Oh yeah, 1 and 2. That's good, and maybe that'll be the end. We'll do those two. Great.
I'd like to ask if either of you would care to comment on the paintings that we see in front of us.
Yeah. Well, I'll say something first, and then maybe you can add to it. I get especially excited about certain pictures, certain paintings as they appear, and these are three that are probably the three that have seemed most mysterious and stirring to me in the recent work, mysteriously complete in their vision. But one of the things that's amazing to me with my dad's work is also the stuff that reappears. And so that farthest painting, the hand and the word yes, and the yes is down in the lower left quadrant. There was a painting that he made in the 60s. I'm going to guess it was made in 66 or 67. A gigantic painting, very mysterious, rich field with drips and depictions of a couple of figures, the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the garden, but a lot of abstraction on this canvas as well, and the word yes, very fluidly written in the bottom left-hand quadrant. And it hung over my parents' bed in Brooklyn. And so I studied it a lot. It was one that I just, when I could get into their space, and I would just look at it and dream my way into it. And it had so many different elements. So this painting is fascinating to me because he landed on the word yes in the lower left-hand quadrant, and it's a callback to 1967. And in some ways, entirely different painting. But, yeah. And this is a thing that I like, is I can ask him questions, and now you get to ask him questions, but I always get to ask him questions. I couldn't figure out whether that was a mouth or an eye, and it was disturbing. And I said, do you mean me to see a mouth or an eye there? And he said, I mean you to see neither and both. I'm trying to strike the exact middle. And I was like, well, you did that. It sure is that. Which it's not exactly a David Cronenberg movie or something, but it's a little unnerving for such a lyrical, 92-year-old pastoral painter to suddenly force you into that space where you can't resolve the image from a mouth to an eye. It's a kind of a little glimpse of some kind of nightmare. So that's very interesting to me as well. Do you want to talk about these three pictures?
The one that Jonathan was just talking about had a a major impulse in its creation by being, over the years, very interested in the poetry of E. Cummings. And I recently reread his first book, which was a novel called The Enormous Room. And so I was kind of basking in that sense of losing oneself in an environment where there are rooms within rooms, space within space, infinite, but you're locked into it. And the mouth-eye suggestion in the center was a happy accident. I didn't know what that was going to be when I started working into the center of the painting, but it seems to me that it hopefully captures that sense of the mystery of a perception and our presence.
So we're going to take that one last question, then we'll go hang out in the lobby. But I'm going to take a second to do one other thing before that question. It occurs to me I can pick this up and turn it around, and you can see something you wouldn't ordinarily know about, which is he writes on the back sometimes quite a lot. Excerpts from things he's been reading, memos. Sometimes they have multiple titles, and then he lands on one, but several possible titles are included on the back. So that's another interesting thing that we can share right here. I just thought I'd turn it around. Okay, last one.
Okay.
Well, I'm sort of a friend of the family, or at least Mara, your sister and daughter. I'm a fellow translator. My name is
excellent.
Jill, and
Hi.
I just wondered if there was any, influence that you guys had on Mara and becoming a translator. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, I mean, we could say one thing, which is the simplest thing, is that, I often am in conversations with other writers, and people, as artists and writers will do, you talk about your origins or your first idea that you might spend your life this way. And, I took, as that piece I read about my father's studio being omnipresent, part of my family reality, I took what he did, which was this incredible, regular, devotional presence of going off to make these things that he wanted to make, as a given, the way you do with parents. And when I talk to other writers and artists, I realize that most of them have to self-invent in a vacuum where it's like, it really seems improbable, even if people aren't actively discouraging them, saying, oh, you couldn't do that, or there's no money in it, or nobody really does that, that's not a life. Even if it's just neutral, they don't have an example in front of them of this kind of practice. And it was such an incredible advantage to me that I took, he wasn't usually or very often at all supporting our family by making the art. It wasn't a job in that sense. Sometimes he was teaching it. He did sell paintings, he did show them, but the thing that was clear about it was that it was in another space. It was outside of, capitalism, really. It was about a practice, a devotion of life, and that was okay. You could make that choice, and so I think I just embodied that without even noticing it. It was a huge leap that saved me a lot of time, really. And my brother makes visual art, and Mara, my sister, who made photographs for a while before she was a literary translator and a writer, I should say, as well, an author. So we all gained this incredible infusion of, it's a funny thing. It's like it's the de-exoticization of art making. It's like, oh, it's just a thing you do. It's not a crazy leap into, a pretentious, ridiculous way to live. It's just actually a normal way to live. Yeah, thanks.
I think that was our last
That
question.
seems good. Thank
And
you all so much.
I just want to thank you and Richard for this.
Thank you. And I want to say one more thing. I'm usually shy about making the advertisement this way, but there's a few things. First of all, it's really supportive of the museum and of the bookshop that came if you go and pick something up at that table. In this case, it's also supportive of all the artists whose work is in here, because it's not just my writing. And the last thing is, you might not ever see this object again, because it's not distributed along so many of the normal channels. So this might be your chance. Go and do all of these good things by supporting that bookseller up there.
And
okay?
while you're out there, you can also have a glass of wine, talk to each other further, come up with more questions. And we'll leave the lights on in here, so if you want to spend a little more time looking or looking more closely, you can. Thank you all for being here, and most especially thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Richard.